welcome friends back to Adobe Live. My name is Voodoo Val, and I'm super stoked to be here with my new buddy, Natalie. Natalie, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you? I'm excited to be here.
I'm excellent, and I'm really excited to get to know you today and kind of dive into all of the wonderful things you have to share with us. But first, I would love to remind our friends over on Behance and YouTube to check out the Adobe Live YouTube channel. Make sure you follow that channel to get all of the updates and all of the awesome things that we're doing here on Adobe Live. And you can kind of tune in there to see all of our archive videos, including all of the awesome content that we had streaming earlier today. You can head over and check out some of the challenges we've aired today, as well as some of the cool segments that we had that were just before our Illustrator challenge. So yeah, without further ado, let's kind of jump into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, what your favorite food is. We talked about that just before the show. So yeah, let us know who you are and what we're going to be doing today.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Natalie. I'm a trained motion graphics designer based in the New York metro area. I also am an Adobe certified professional in visual design and video design. I currently work with the Nielsen Company with their creative team as a motion designer, and I'm truly enjoying the work that I'm doing with them. In addition, I'm also a visual effects compositor. I've worked with a variety of independent filmmakers based on previous recommendations. And I also do social media production work with classic rock band The Black Ties. And I'll be demonstrating my work between Premiere and After Effects using the dynamic link today to add a little more polish in the post-production realm to one of the promos that I put together from a music festival that they participated in. So I'm really honored to be here today, and thank you for having me.
That is just so exciting, and I got a little sneak peek at some of the stuff that we're working on. I'm super pumped about it. It's going to be great. So yeah, why don't we dive in? You can tell us a little bit about kind of how you get started and what this project's all about.
Sure thing. Okay, so I did a lot of the basic adjustments ahead of time. I'm working with multicam footage. I also streamlined the process to make it easier in terms of bringing these projects into After Effects so that it's a little more streamlined. I'm going to show you the basic cut that I have now prior to additional adjustments inside of After Effects and color correction, so you get a basic idea of what I'm working with. So let me make this screen a little bit larger here.
Awesome. 1, 2, 3.
So that gives you an overall idea of the promo that I'm going to be putting together. So I have 2 fixed cameras and then a handheld camera. And the issue is sometimes when I am filming on location and I'm working around the crowd, I'm working with other photographers, especially in this case, there are chances that the camera is going to shake or it's going to move. So I'm going to be making small adjustments to some of the clips that could be finessed a little bit more in order for it to be just as strong as the other clips inside of the sequence. And in addition, I'm also going to be playing with having multiple panels so that several cameras can be seen at the same time at certain points in the promo. So
Awesome. Okay, yeah, this is cool. I feel like, your explanation of this, I can imagine like end products that I have seen both in your portfolio and just like, live in the world. And so it's going to be really great to kind of see how it comes together. This is going to be awesome. So yeah, let's do it.
sounds good. Now, I actually had set up ahead of time. I had visual markers set where I thought it would be best to introduce that multi-camera look, that multi-panel look, I should say. So why don't we start with the first clip here? Now I tend to organize based on color scheme. Usually I'll use either RGB or CMYK, so either digital or print colors to organize. But what I usually tell people in my Behance live streams, which are archived on my channel, you can organize them based on whatever helps you remember it the best. So, okay. So now that I have all of the initial, oh, that's right. It actually extends here. So I'm going to bring that out. Okay. I think we're set up here. And now I can bring all of these clips into After Effects. I'm going to make this just a bit smaller so I can see all the clips here.
Yeah, and that kind of color coding all of these really does work wonders. Like, you know, the times that I have done video editing, I don't usually have this many elements, and I can see how as that number ratchets up, things can get a little chaotic. But looking at your files, I can really kind of look in there and see a definite pattern and organization set to navigate around all of those things.
I think it definitely helps, especially if you are visually going to lay out where everything is.
Mm-hmm.
And that counts for both programs, really. Now, this is the handheld footage that I'm going to be working with here. You can tell there's a little bit of camera shake. I'm going to just put this in frame here.
So the handheld footage, if I can ask about like your equipment, is this just like using like an iPhone or something, or do you have like a setup that you walk around these events with, like a bigger camera?
Oh, I definitely had a set. I definitely had a setup. So I work with my Canon 60D. I have had it for years and I enjoy using it. I primarily use that to capture handheld footage of the black ties whenever I have to put together social media promos. And typically I'll either handheld it or I will use my stabilizer with a video mount so I can move around and be able to focus without my arms aching or my back aching.
Oh yeah, I'm
It
sure
definitely,
like when you do stuff like that, I'm sure you've probably learned that the hard way too, and just kind of perfect your kit that you have to bring with you to these things. I think that's really crazy because, you know, as somebody who is someone who loves to kind of consume this sort of content, being able to see stuff like this, you never really think of you know, like at the event having to walk around and lug all that stuff around and like bring this content to us. So I want you to know I have a mental image in my head right now of you with all of your tech hopping around this event. Also, hello to Elizabeth Mock in the chat. It's good to see you. And
hello.
Laura, Sam, Robert, welcome in. Just want to kind of give a little shout out to all of our friends, all our Adobe Live family. Richard, it's good to see you. Steve Casaboom, the man with the name. It's good to see you, man. Welcome in, Ashrad, and all of you folks. Feel free to toss us any questions or anything you may have as Natalie goes on through her process today, and I will happily relay them. And yeah, let's dive back on in.
So I was just checking to make sure that the RAM preview was set to quarter resolution to streamline the process so we can continue forward. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm actually manually motion tracking the footage. And you can use the warp stabilizer, but it depends on the kind of footage that you're working with. In my case, normally when I'm working with footage of musicians and they're moving around on stage, and this is a bit of a trial and error process, so it may work for some people, it may work better another way. But I prefer to have as much precision as possible when it comes to stabilizing the footage. Usually after this, I will reintroduce the motion through keyframing the position, possibly the rotation. And there were some times where I would use the warp stabilizer and it would either be smooth or no motion. But what would happen is if somebody is bouncing around on stage to the beat of the song, it'll stabilize around them as opposed to stabilizing the footage as you would expect it to. So I've had both experiences. So it depends on what process works best for you.
Gotcha. I wouldn't even have thought of that. That's a really good point there. So yeah, you are kind of stabilizing this, as you said. You've got the mobile loadout here, and kind of making it a little more solid and stable here for everyone who will watch this. What is next?
So after this, after I've normally I apply the motion track keyframes to a separate null control, and
Mhm.
you can apply them directly over the footage, but I like to do that because in case there's an unusual shift in the keyframes, I can go in and make those small adjustments without it affecting the original footage. Because what happens is when you stabilize this way, it'll apply it to the anchor point rather than the position,
Hmm.
especially if you're working with the position of the footage. So it's not going to appear under position, it's going to appear under anchor point, which is it works a bit differently than the position function does in both Premiere and After Effects.
Gotcha. Welcome in, Anthony. And I also see Axel in the chat saying, I lurk silently. That's cool. We love our lurkers. Lurkers are great. If you guys are tuning in and you're working on other work as you listen to us, just kind of hanging out for the design ASMR happening here on Adobe Live, it's good to have you folks with us. Enjoy your lurk.
Now, there are some times where the initial point maybe goes outside of the composition frame and you have to reapply the track point to another section. The goal usually with this method is to have one continuous line all the way through.
Mhm.
So if you have to reattach it to a different point somewhere else in the composition, you can absolutely do that, but you just have to make sure to move those keyframes so that it's one continuous movement from start to finish.
Okay. So for this particular event, like as you work, what in your opinion was your favorite experience about this? Be it like actually taking the footage or walking around. I know that you're a big fan of these guys and love working with them, but I'd love to know, just as like your experience being present here, what was the thing that was like most memorable to you getting to do this project?
What was really incredible about this particular production, which was actually, they went through the entire soundtrack of Beatles Love from start
Hmm.
to finish with different musicians. The Black Ties were representing the early Beatles, so they were playing some of the earlier Beatles tunes at certain points, this being one of them. What I found the most exciting about this was the elaborate production. The stage setup was just really nicely laid out, and it made for wonderful moments where I captured gorgeous lighting on stage at different points. Maybe the lights illuminate a musician at a certain point, or and this happens quite a bit. Maybe one of the musicians engages the audience, but also engages my camera. And there's plenty of moments like that occur when I'm filming, not just the Black Ties, but the musicians that performed in this event in general.
That's super cool. I guess like, filming events like this could also be like really extra special because of course you're there and you're doing work and stuff, but the chance that the performers on stage actually look at you and point at you and engage with you is probably pretty high compared to like your average festival goer. That's pretty cool.
You can tell that they are really enjoying performing for the audience, that they're excited, that they love what they're doing, and it just
Mhm.
shows through. And I love when I capture those moments. They're thrilling for me as somebody that works in post-production.
That's awesome. That's really special. We have Elizabeth Mock saying that she is also lurking, working on things, preparing for an event. Awesome. Awesome. Sounds cool. Would love to know more, but I know you're lurking and working. But that sounds very exciting. Let's see. Robert's talking about the Beatles. um,
Nice.
awesome. Awesome. Looks like Robert was drifting off for bed and then heard the Beatles and Natalie and was like, oh, here we go. Adobe Live.
I know the feeling. I know the feeling. I will be somewhere and maybe there's a radio playing and suddenly I'll hear a Beatles song and I'll instantly know what album and where and what song it is and who was playing.
So this is not, you're this is a Beatles themed project, but you're like a Beatles fan. Like, so
Oh,
this is special for you, extra special, I should say.
absolutely. Diehard Beatles fan over here. If you didn't guess big, if you didn't guess based on the
The
decor
background.
behind me.
Yeah, that would mean then that Natalie is to Beatles as Voodoo Val is to Star Wars. So I feel it. I feel it, definitely.
Absolutely. But they're one of my favorite albums that came out when I was growing up was a Beatles anthology, which had a lot of raw audio, early
Mm,
performances of the Beatles back when they were teenagers, during their Hamburg days, early audition tapes, and it's one of my favorites to go back to. The miniseries is just as good, but there was a music video that they did for the song "Free as a Bird," which was completed. It was a demo by John, and it was completed by the other three Beatles around the time that the miniseries took place.
mm.
And it's just full of post production, visual effects, compositing, and I always loved it. And it was definitely an early influence for projects later on that are in my portfolio.
Nice, nice. Yeah, it's really cool. Is there like aside from, things like that, like Beatle themed things, what would you say are some of your biggest inspirations aside from that? Like things that you have seen that were just like, I need to figure out how to do this, or even just more casual influences that you might encounter every day, such as maybe other music or maybe TV shows and productions that you tune into regularly? What really kind of keeps you making new things and inspired to do more?
That is a really good question. Whenever I look at a piece of media, whenever I listen to a song or uh, just anything really, I take into account the quality of it, not necessarily when it was made, but what endures about it. So I would look at some of the uh, earliest films. Like one of the earliest influences for me were films like Citizen Kane, which
Mm,
revolutionized how the camera was used, how lighting was used, just overall playing with the angles and the lighting to create emphasis, to change the mood. And you can see that once you look at that film, you can see uh, its influence in every film up until this point.
mm,
It's
yeah.
and the story behind it is just as fascinating. There's another film about the development of Citizen Kane called RKO 281, and it's another one of my favorites. I ended up watching that first and then
Mm,
watching Citizen Kane and then going back to watch RKO again. And there are little nuances in
yeah.
RKO that reference Citizen Kane that I missed the first time. But it definitely stood out to me as being one of the most prominent examples of uh, beautiful cinematography as well as storytelling.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I kind of feel the same way about a lot of the Star Wars productions and things. And I swear this is relevant, Adobe. We can talk about Star Wars in this context. But like, I feel like, Star Wars historically has been like this kind of powerhouse of like practical effects mixed with visual effects and editing and stuff, and kind of seeing like you were saying, like going back in time and looking at the production process for a lot of the older films and seeing how some of those shots were actually lined up with like the models and like the manual visual effects and stuff that they had to go do versus like how it's evolved over time has always been really inspiring to me. And being able to see like how those sorts of things come together and have evolved in like the methods we use over time. But if you love Beatles like I love Star Wars, then I think it's pretty safe to say you agree when I say that, we definitely have different ways of doing things now when it comes to producing film and creating TV shows and editing things and compositing things. But some of the I would say maybe texture is the word. Some of the texture and just the vibes of those old films and the old methods still have a solid place in my heart, you know? And I love the new stuff, but you know, the old things are just, you know, it's nostalgic and it's precious.
I completely agree. And actually, we're big Star Wars fans over here.
Woo!
Yeah,
Then
so
this
I
is the right
completely,
place.
absolutely. There's a fantastic documentary released right around the time of when the when episodes 1, 2, and 3 were being developed
Mm,
about the production of Star Wars for the original trilogy. And it's one of my favorites to look back on because it's just so informative and talking about the problems of the production, how they resolved them, and how that technology revolutionized visual effects today. It's a
hmm.
really wonderful watch. It's one of my favorites to go back to. I'd have to look up the name of it, but it's
I can't remember the title of it either, but I know that
yeah.
I've looked at this before. Also, for those of you in the chat, if you listen really, really close, you can hear the subtle sound of Natalie and I becoming best friends because
Aw.
she just announced that she's also a big Star Wars fan. So we are right on the same level right now. This is great. But yeah, it really is like, you know, things like that and stuff like what you we're talking about really I think, as you say, like revolutionize how things kind of happen today, because those are projects that were being done when around the time where they were like, okay, we're going to do this and not a lot of people are doing this, or how are we going to make this big giant epic thing and make it feel like that on the screen? Like how do you come up with that? And I love hearing stories about older productions like that and like how they had to solve problems, like crazy problem solving in production is a fun thing to read about for me. Elizabeth says the new friendship is forming on Adobe Live, 100%. I also personally, I get a lot of inspiration, like just, you know, trolling around on Netflix and looking for new stuff, like seeing but seeing like, you know, a show come out that just has like a really powerful visual presence. And one of the things that did that for me, I don't know if you're into like horror at all,
Hmm?
but The Haunting of Hill House. Um,
Oh, okay.
I thought the cinematography in that was incredible, and I'm predominantly an illustrator and painter, but you know, that was like something where I watched it and I was like, I have to paint something like this because the composition and the colors and the mood and everything they're doing with this camera is
Yes.
incredible. And so I have a few like standout pieces of media, not attached to like well, I guess it's a franchise now. But you know, when I first saw that, it was like the first installation of that, and it was like a standalone for a time where I was just like, that's really good. That's just going in like my mental mind palace of things that are going to influence stuff going forward. Is there, I don't know if you're big into like Netflix shows and things, but if there's like a tiny show or like a singular film you've caught recently where either the film itself or like even the trailer for it or something really inspired you to make something? Is there anything you can think of like that?
Um, I have seen a couple of trailers on Netflix that have come up. I haven't had a chance to really take it in because typically when I'm working, I like to have something on that I've seen hundreds of times.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
The
I can just
Walking
sort of
Dead for me. Yeah, for sure. I get that.
one of the shows, there's many examples of films and shows that definitely had that impact on me. Not necessarily a Netflix movie, although I'm not sure if it's on the platform. I ended up seeing it in the theater. There's a film that pays homage to Vincent van Gogh
Mm,
called Loving Vincent, and
mm.
it's entirely done in hand painted rotoscope, and it's just gorgeous from start to finish.
Yes.
Right
Yeah.
after,
Yeah.
and I saw the trailer first thing and I knew I had to see this film. So I actually went and saw it in person and saw it on the big screen. I was proud I was able to do that. But right after, I just had to draw something and play with that sort of post-impressionist textural style.
Mm.
So it definitely has an impact. There's another film, and I'm not sure if it's on Netflix. It's an older film, but this is actually what influenced me to study visual effects. The film American Beauty. There is an
Mm,
iconic part of the film where the cheerleader is, and it's all imagined in the main character's head that this is happening. She's dancing around and she opens up her jacket and rose petals fly out,
mm,
and it was incredibly symbolic and completely visual and gorgeously captivated,
mm.
gorgeously captured, excuse me. But I saw that and I wanted to know how they did that among other projects that maybe portrayed visual effects the same way, but that was an early influence as far as compositing is concerned.
Nice, nice. Yeah. Really, like when you say iconic, you definitely mean it, because the things that you've listed are just like really visually stunning, and you can tell because a lot of the older names have persisted, for sure have persisted. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, awesome. I love to hear it. And I would love to know if anybody in the chat has any like piece of media, rather it is a film or a show or a video game. I'm a big gamer, so if you guys want to list video games, books, podcasts, anything that you guys have consumed that has really kind of lit that fire for you to like, you know what, I got to put down what I'm doing and I got to go make something. I gotta create something. I'd love to know what it is. I'd love for you folks to share your favorites and let us know what is really kind of your favorite sort of thing. And let's talk about it, because I feel like every single time I do one of these shows, I always end up like putting something on the list of new favorite pieces of media. So introduce us, folks. Introduce us to some new great stuff. Richard is kind of sharing, talking about like, silent films from the 30s and
Yes.
things. 100%. The Akira Kurosawa influence of Star Wars. Elizabeth says watching Adobe Live for inspiration. Hey,
That's a good answer.
yeah, that's a great answer.
Best answer.
Yes. Adobe Fam is pretty fabulous, and I, to that point, I will say, there's a lot of stuff here where you can come in and do, kind of what we're doing now, where somebody says, what is your influence for X, Y, and Z? And then all of a sudden a whole new door has been opened to you. And it's kind of, you can't really replace that with anything else. Elizabeth says web comics.
Oh,
Awesome.
nice.
She was a big fan of like local newspaper comics, and so web comics have really turned into a big thing for her. That's pretty cool. I wanted to make a web comic for a time, but I never really got into it, because making a comic is no small task. It's no small task at all. But yeah, I like that. Great inspiration, Elizabeth. And just to check in here on our project too, you are getting kind of farther into your process here with the kind of tracking here and setting up this shot. This process for you, how long does this usually take versus, like now versus when you're working? And is it an easier part of the process for you rather than other things? Because I know, we're here and we're chatting, we're talking, carrying on a conversation while we're doing it. But I always like to know, as our designer friends get into the meat of their work, what is the stream versus reality kind of process as we go along?
That's an incredibly good question. Usually, when it comes to this part of the process, it really depends on the quality of the footage and how to problem solve around camera shake, and perhaps the subject matter goes out of frame at a certain point, what to do about that. The majority of the process involving projects like this really have to, it really has to do with how it was cut together for one, but also the quality of that particular clip that I'm working with.
Mm,
So in this case, the initial keyframes are already set up, but now I have to align them all together so it's one continuous string.
mm,
Otherwise, when it does stabilize the position, it's going to jump around quite a bit. So it's better to have them all connected in some way.
gotcha.
Uh, Now, when it comes to other processes that I work in, my go-to is After Effects, but I also work with other programs in the Adobe suite on a daily basis.
Hmm.
So I'm constantly jumping between programs, and I found that understanding multiple programs, and not only that, also having a background in motion graphics, visual effects, having basic training in digital filmmaking and concert photography definitely helps with projects like this. But
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really great point too. I think that a lot of the skills and stuff that we pick up as we move, forward in a creative career, really, it turns out they really sort of lend themselves to each other, don't they? Um,
Absolutely.
I feel like I illustrate and I've animated and stuff, and I've done, designs for websites and things. And sometimes, when I look at the breadth of my own work, I see a lot of differences, but I do find that whatever project I'm working for, I'm typically drawing from another kind of work, and incorporating knowledge. And it's cool to hear that you kind of feel the same way. I would love to know if anybody in the chat also, I've got a lot of questions for chat today.
Oh, nice.
I would love to know if anyone in the chat, working within a certain creative realm right now, draws inspiration or knowledge and techniques from a different area of work. And what are those two areas? So what you're doing now versus where you actually see a lot of overlap from, if anyone would like to share.
Now, the one thing I always like to do when it comes to any project is I always do prior research on the subject.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I know a lot about it already, I like to know other tiny little details that maybe could be incorporated in some way that maybe isn't as apparent if you were just looking at the surface information of it.
Okay.
So I always think that looking at the background of something, what makes it stand out, what to take inspiration from is also important to also take into account.
Yeah, I see what you mean by that, because I've experienced that before. If a client says to me, hey, I would love for you to illustrate this character, and I have the information for the character, I can paint that character, but I feel like the piece will have a lot more impact if I understand, like, what's the character's name? Who are they? Where are they from? What has their life experience been? All that sort of stuff. And I feel like it's probably the same as you say for doing a lot of video editing and stuff. Is not, you could edit the video and you can put it together and you can make it look great. But if you really understand maybe the history of this festival, or the kinds of people who would attend this festival, the history of the performers who are there, I feel like you can put a lot more depth, into the work that, while without that information would have still been a great end product, but kind of adds, I guess, a little extra love, if you will, to the
Absolutely.
project. Young Creatives back in the chat. Hello, Young. It's good to see you. Welcome back. Welcome back. Oh, Elizabeth says, I've worked with photography, animation, illustration, and graphic design. Sometimes I pull from data visualization, and has also worked in psychology and mental health. Wow.
Nice.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I could see how, an understanding of psychology and having studied mental health and things, I feel like you could probably draw from that to create some pretty dynamic visual graphics. Very pleasing, very comfortable to the eye, understanding the mind and how it might perceive and take in the information you design. So that's really cool. Robert, I was 4 years. Let me see. Hold on. I think I'm reading this wrong. Give me one moment. I should read this first before I say it out loud. Oh, okay. So 4 years old when the Beatles began. So you can say I've grown up with their music. Is that what you mean, Robert? That's crazy. So yeah, you've been a Beatles fan for life. That's
Nice.
awesome. Good stuff. We like to hear it. Richard says, any contemporary films you watch over and over?
That's a really good question. Contemporary films. Well, one of the ones that always stood out to me, there's a couple actually, and usually it has to do with how the story is presented. It could be simple, it could be elaborate. Maybe the cinematography is just beautiful. Off the top of my head, I would say that one of the ones I always go back to is When Harry Met Sally,
Mm,
because while cinematography is simple, it's beautifully laid out. Maybe it's the conversation is just between these two people, but it's just presented in such a nice setting, but you're also seeing the growth of these people over time.
mm.
So that's one. Another one is Sofia Coppola's film The Virgin Suicides. I've listened to the soundtrack early on, and then I ended up seeing the film uh a little bit later on, but I was just captivated by the cinematography, the lighting. It was just gorgeously presented.
Yeah, one of those. I know the feeling that you're expressing there, like when you just take in a film and you're like, this is it. This is this is a good one. Here we go. Richard says, I like Hidden Figures. Nerds are so cool.
Oh
I
yeah, I've heard good things about that one.
don't think I've ever heard of Hidden Figures. I might give us a quick Google. Um, just take a
I'm
peek.
doing a little bit of troubleshooting right now.
Yeah. Do you want to explain maybe if you've run into an issue, kind of what it has happened?
Well, right now I am attempting to add the stabilization keyframes to the footage that I'm working with, and what's happening is the first keyframe is applying, but not necessarily the rest of them. Now,
Mm.
what I can do, because I know how this program works, if you're looking at the motion track points, okay, tracker 2, there's 2 trackers set up here. That's why. I just figured out why. It was applying the motion track of the second one that was accidentally made versus the first one.
Oh,
So
gotcha. Okay.
it's good to check.
Yes, and troubleshooting on the fly. It's great, you know, so maybe if somebody in the chat ever runs into that issue, they'll remember this and kind of go back and do their double check and fix theirs as well.
Definitely. Okay,
um,
now let me
oh yes, I
see.
know what Hidden Figures is. I just pulled this up. I don't know why. Sometimes the titles of things escape me, but the visual impact of like the branding and like stills from the film itself, I know what it is. It's just the words that elude me. Yes, I haven't actually seen Hidden Figures, but I've heard excellent things.
Same, absolutely. It looks like a wonderful uh it looks like a wonderful moment in time that was captured, and I would love to know more about it.
Same, same. Let's see. Robert was saying that talking about the popularity of Beatles in Sweden at the time, very cool. Um, movie Backbeat is excellent. Also never heard of that one, but I,
Yes.
can look through
That's
that.
it's really good. It's all about the Beatles during the Hamburg years.
Mhm.
And it's definitely it portrays what it was like for them just getting started. And it's been a while since I've seen it all the way through, but I do remember seeing quite a bit of it.
Nice, nice. Um, just scrolling through here, making sure I haven't missed any questions or anything. Elizabeth agreeing that webcomics are very big tasks. Yes, indeed. There's a lot of projects out there that I feel like are daunting, but definitely something that eventually I would love to take on, like making a video game or writing a novel, things like that. Do you have any questions? Do you have any like projects that you think that one day you would really, really love to do, which are maybe a tad far-fetched or definitely a big task to complete that you couldn't do now, but something you'd like to work up to working on? Any dream projects or something for the future?
Oh wow. Well,
Big question.
well, the best way I can answer that is I wanted to understand every part of the production process. I pride myself on being a strong generalist. I wanted to be strong in all areas from concept development all the way to the final animation and being able to understand every facet of pre to post production. It's pretty open ended. I would love to explore many areas. I'd love to explore working in more of the film realm, more in the visual effects realm, understanding more ways to go about that process,
Mm-hmm.
but also exploring other areas of motion design and where it can be applied because that's also evolving. You see it everywhere, and the application can actually go as far as augmented or virtual reality and go beyond that. So,
Mm-hmm.
again, it's pretty open ended. I'd have to say that there are certain kinds of approaches that I would love to explore more of. For example, one of the projects in my portfolio and in my current demo reel, I was playing with hand-drawn rotoscope of footage that I captured of the black ties, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that was exploring Adobe Fresco and the brushes in there because they're supposed to be compatible to the traditional medium.
Mm.
And so I was exploring that, seeing what it could do. But I was also, at the time, Adobe Fresco was not set up for animation. So I was doing more of a manual process, but I would love to
Mm-hmm.
explore that aspect more, maybe introduce it into a full length promo for them, maybe playing with different brushes, different color textures, among other things. So again, it's pretty broad across the board, but there's certain kinds of things I would love to explore more of.
Yeah, that's awesome. I use Fresco every day, and the addition of the animation features has been like really just kind of mind blowing. And I love it. So I definitely feel you there, and the brushes and things is really cool. And I know we've got some pretty cool questions here in chat, but before I ask those, I would like to ask something that I thought of as you were answering that last question, kind of getting into all the elements of film. Would you act in a movie? Would you be in a film?
I would.
Yeah, awesome. I would love to see a film that you are in, that you helped produce, that you helped, in the post-production and early concept phases. I would
That would be
definitely sign up
wonderful.
to watch that. But we do have some questions in here in the chat. Greg says, when you shoot the footage, how much thinking do you put into what the final composition might be?
I think about it constantly as I'm working. Uh, with the work that I do with the black ties and particularly this show, I know where the high points are. I have an innate knowledge of the songs that they're performing, so I know where their cameras should be at specific
Mm,
points. But I also make sure I go over it in my head. I make sure that I capture every musician that's performing so that I get a variety of shots, but that also each musician is represented when I cut it together for the promos.
mm. Nice. I like, what you said there about, because you're not just filming the show, you are also filming the individuals. You're also filming the crescendos and those high moments, those high points, as you say, that to expect in certain instances. So it's not just, aiming the camera. There's a lot of those things, and you go over all that in your head. Um,
And
Very cool.
in addition to that, I'm also taking into account my training in digital filmmaking, arranging the composition so it's the
Mm,
strongest it can be, but also taking into account my training in concert photography. There are do's and don'ts that I learned very early on when I took a course of concert photography with a Rolling Stone magazine photographer.
ooh.
And back then, we were actually capturing Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues, Mike Dawes, who's an acoustic guitarist, and Julie Reagans, who's the keyboardist. And so we were going over the do's and don'ts of how to capture musicians. And it just, from that point on, it stood out to me. So when I ended up filming the black ties for the very first time, I was taking all of those notes into account and framing it correctly so that it was the strongest it could be and that it represented them the best that I could.
Mm. I just have to say, you put a lot of thought and like really genuine passion and thoughtfulness like into these projects. I could tell just by the way you talk about it, like it's really kind of a precious thing. And I noticed that. I'm sure chat notices it. This is really cool just to hear you talk about your favorite points and how like your process and how you go about kind of putting this together.
Thank
It
you.
looks like everybody's pretty excited about it in the chat as well. It looks like Robert would also like to know which are your favorite parts of Adobe Fresco, I believe. What do you like about what Adobe has done with Fresco? And I think you mentioned the animation and also the brushes, but is there anything else pertaining to Fresco that you really enjoyed, or are those your top two?
Well, I actually got to see it presented at Adobe Max in 2019, among other innovations that came about. And what excited me the most about the program at the time was how some of the brushes, the watercolor, the ink brushes, would actually replicate that motion as if you were using the real medium. And that I thought was really fascinating. So I wanted to play with the more naturalized textures in addition to experimenting with hand-drawn rotoscope for that project. It's in my portfolio, and it's to their performance of the Carl Perkins song "Lend Me Your Comb."
Awesome. We will definitely have to check that out. Maybe we can get a link in the chat so that we can take a peek at it. I'm gonna make sure that everyone, let me grab this, can kind of take a peek at I've got your website open just on my own computer as well. And I love all of the different things, like just like such a wide array of different things that you do and how you've presented it. And I feel like it's really easy to just go straight to everything. While there is like a whole bunch of work, it's denoted very clearly and precisely. So I feel like I can kind
Thank
of
you.
jump in and take in all this stuff. What was the I'm going to put a link specifically to this page. What was the title of the song that you said that you did that for?
It was to their performance of "Lend Me Your Comb."
Lend me your comb. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to peek around, and if I can snatch it, I will make it easy for those in the chat to find it. And I also see that you have Instagram and other social media, so definitely take a look at Natalie's social media and all of the other cool places that you can find her online. I'm definitely going to do my fair share of like social media stalking after this. Like I'm going to go follow you in all of my favorite places so that I can
Thank
keep up
you.
on what you're doing for sure, for sure. Let me see. I'm just lost hunting around here. I'm loving this website. So maybe so you've kind of gone through a lot of this process for tracking it, and I noticed that there's kind of a change here as you're going through and really previewing this. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of clue us in on as you move into this portion of the project? Can see it's starting
So,
to look smooth.
yeah. So right now what I'm doing, I'm looking for any small shifts in motion here, like that as an example. And I've also got a guide set up right here, basically to map out the headroom of this particular footage
Mhm,
so that it does not go beyond that point, but it's also level.
mhm.
And this is all manually done with nulls. The footage being controlled by the nulls, actually, no, parented to the null. That's the terminology. So right now what I'm doing is that I'm looking for any small shifts in footage that may cause it to inadvertently shake when previewing,
And you
so
kind of
that
mentioned
it's
that earlier about, like going back and kind of checking to make sure there's no like jerking or bouncing that is kind of throws you off a little bit. So
yeah.
kind of seeing that here.
Okay, so I'm also going to set up another guide here because at this point they're in front of the microphone, they're completely stable. So I'm going to line that up, and if I have to add an additional control to address the transparency on the edges, then I take care of that.
Alrighty.
So Let me take a look at this here.
And so we talked about kind of your favorite parts of the process of like going out. You're in the field, you're shooting the footage and you're at the event and stuff. But what would you say, if you could choose a favorite part? What's your favorite part of like the actual like this portion, like getting in, digging in, and like really producing an end product piece of content? What would you say is the part that brings you the most like satisfaction or joy as you start to put this together?
It's a little bit of everything involved in this kind of process. During the production phase, when I'm filming, my favorite thing is when the musicians engage the camera,
Mhm.
maybe some of the musicians, as an example, in the black ties, if they're goofing off with one another and just they're just having fun. I love being able to capture that. But particularly when we're talking about the entire process, uh, I absolutely love going into post production and really finessing the footage, possibly experimenting with it to give it that overall polish.
Hmm. I
So that's
imagine it's probably
always,
fun to like look back because you're going through all the footage. You can kind of remember those moments where they're like, "Hey, it's you," and you're in the crowd like, "It's me." I bet that's fun. But yeah, I kind of, I really get what you're saying about that too. And it's like I definitely have parts of my own personal process that are like my favorite as I really get into the meat of like putting a project together. But there is that underlying joy as well throughout the process of like it's all starting to come together and knowing, especially when you know you're nearing on finishing the project and you're finally going to get to like take it in as a whole and be like, I made this.
yeah,
I made this. It's a good feeling. It's a good feeling for sure.
absolutely.
I would love to know if there's anyone in the chat who'd like to share their favorite part of the process, be it the like post production, jumping in video editing, or kind of going out and gathering the elements and content used, be it filming or maybe you're gathering interviews, maybe you are gathering reference for a visual project, whatever it is. I'd love to know which is your favorite part. Richard is saying, can we get a side by side of the original footage with the adapted? I'm going to
Oh,
leave that up to you if you want to go ahead and if
let me
you're
see
cool,
if I
stop in and do that.
can. Let me see if I can actually. I have two instances of the footage that
Mhm.
I can. I can bring up the original here and take a look. Okay, so this is completely. Let me detach it from the null. Okay, so this is what I'm initially working with. And it's good, but it could be finessed a little bit more.
Mhm.
So that's sort of what I'm adjusting right now. It's a good question.
Yeah, I like it. It's also really cool. I don't know if you do this with your editing here, but when I'm painting, I typically do um, either, if not a side by side comparison with what I had before versus what I've worked on now, or sometimes I will group all of my layers and things that I've worked on for each day. So at the end of that work session, I can like hide and unhide just to see the difference. I like to do
Yeah.
that because it makes me feel like I'm making serious project progress in my project. So I like to do that just anyways, regardless of whether or not Richard is asking to see it. But it's a good way to check on the progress. Just even if you're already familiar with your footage, or I'm already familiar with my painting, being able to see that comparison or toggle that layer on and off sometimes does wonders for, I would say, just my personal, what's the word I'm looking for? Like my motivation, as I'm moving through, because depending on how long like editing a video for you would take, and producing this content would take, or painting something for me would take, or perhaps designing websites or logos, or whatever anyone else is working on in the chat, when you get to a certain point in the project, I'm sure everyone has experienced that moment where it's like, I've been doing this for a long time. You've been looking at it for a long time, and things kind of, blend together. You don't really perceive it as it is when you've stared at the same project for hours on end. And so being able to like kind of show yourself quickly that the juxtaposition of like the change and the progress that has been made can remind you, you've done good work today, and take a look at
Thank you.
that. Look at these questions. Or questions. I keep using the word questions in place of a word that I'm trying to use. I feel like I've done that 3 times today. I don't know what it is about the word questions that keeps sticking into my conversation, but yeah, look at your progress, and be proud of the progress that you've made. It's good stuff.
Absolutely, I agree. One thing I tend to do is I'll go back and I'll look at earlier projects from either when I was just getting started as a trained professional or maybe worked during my student years at Ringling. And I'll look at it and think about what I would do with it if I was working on it now, and going through that process and sort of reverse engineering how I could make it stronger. And it's good to do that. It's good to check and see where you can progress. That's always important for growth.
Yeah, 100%. I think I've done that a few times with illustrations where there was a challenge some years ago that I had seen. I think it happens often, but the first time I had ever heard of it was maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. And it was like, draw this again. And
Yeah.
you're supposed to like choose something that you've done in your past. And then with your skills that you have now, draw it again, paint it again, rework this. And I found, exactly as you say, going back and realizing, number one, you're solving problems differently. So you like reinvent the way that you're, maybe not reinvent, but like solve the problems again, with a better trained hand, with more knowledge, with more experience. I think is not only a good mental exercise and physical exercise too, as you're like doing the motions to create it. But for me, it was a really positive affirmation of growth, and not even just in the visual sense, but realizing I could remember points in this project that I'm recreating where I struggled or where I was uncertain of myself, and then realizing that as I approach them again, I don't have those uncertainties, or not as many uncertainties, was really kind of a great experience for me to not only see that I had grown, but feel definitely that I had grown inside, So let us know if you folks have ever done that. Have you ever re-illustrated something you've painted in the past? Have you ever re-edited some footage that you had done in the past? I feel like all of us probably have that one project that's floating around out there that you're like, man, I wish I did that better or differently. I've got a couple of those where I'm just like, don't scroll that far down on my Instagram because that works from like years ago, and maybe I should get rid of it. But I feel like everybody has that project they wish they could go back and do that. Have you done it? And if you haven't, are you going to? This is a subtle challenge issued.
Yeah. No, it's a fantastic prompt to give people. I personally, whenever it comes to how I present myself, I always put my strongest work forward, especially in my demo reel, which I just updated after so much time. And that was because I had to juggle quite a few projects back and forth. So I had to make sure that those deadlines were addressed, which are always important. Make sure you address your deadlines whenever you're working on anything. But I will go back and decide if there's a particular project that is currently in the reel, does it represent what I can do, and even does it represent my current skills now? Is it strong enough to be alongside other projects that maybe are more up to date? And that pertains more to maybe earlier professional projects or even student work. Depending on the student work, it could be it could really show off your skill. I can tell you that I've had recruiters talk with me, and sometimes the work that they are most drawn to is the student work. So it
Mm,
could have an impact depending on the quality that it brings
mm.
to the rest of the overall demo reel, or your portfolio in general.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. I think you're very right. And I think too, that sometimes that process in and of itself is difficult, like more easier said than done, because I struggled with this for a lot of years, and it's something that still happens to me today, is like, coming to the point where you make something and it was like a serious feat, like you've done this project, it's a large project, you're very proud of it, you feel like it represents the best of your ability and skill, showcases you perfectly, but it's not true 5 years later,
Right.
and so I struggle every once in a while removing those things from my portfolio, because when I look at them, I still remember that sense of accomplishment I felt when I finished it. And some of them I'm like, okay, this is old work, I should remove this. But some of them I have such an emotional, sentimental tie to them, because I felt like I really leveled up or accomplished something when I did it, that I can't remove that from the value it adds or does not add to my portfolio. So I have to
Right.
ask for a second opinion for sure on some things. Have you ever felt like that, where something was just, a project of yours was something that was very near and dear to your heart, and it was difficult to remove it from your demo reel or your portfolio?
Wow. I would say that the most difficult thing is not so much very early on when I was putting together my work. It was stressed that we represent the strongest work in our portfolio, but also uh, when putting together your portfolio, your demo reel, you're going to want to represent the kind of work you want to do in future projects.
Mhm.
So you might want to focus in that direction. And I tend to think in that way. So the projects that were the strongest of mine that I enjoyed working on and I want to continue in that direction, that's where I focus. So if you think in that regard, it will allow you to continue down the path you want.
Yeah, I agree. And I apologize. I think that my Chihuahua is trying to be on the stream right
Aw,
now. Um,
hello.
I have he's right outside my door, very small, but very loud, and I have sent a distress call to my family to snag him. So hopefully that doesn't go on for long. But
Right.
he says hello, apparently. He says hello very sadly because he can't snuggle at the moment, but
Aw.
hello nonetheless.
Well, I completely understand. I have a couple of rescue cats, and
Oh.
yeah, oh, they are so funny. They're motion design cats. And
Hmm.
what's funny is I'll be working on a project or I'll be doing a live stream, and my oldest rescue cat, Jeremy,
Hmm.
he will try to get my attention because he wants to steal my cup of water. So there may be, yeah, oh, it's hilarious because at certain points he'll just sit and stare at me. At other points he'll be swatting at my hands from behind the computer. And there
Oh,
was
that's so funny.
very early on when I started live streaming on Behance, he
Mhm.
kept he knew I was talking to an audience, but he couldn't see them.
Oh
And
yeah.
my my setup was a lot more simplified than it is now.
Hmm.
But he kept tilting the camera, like he tilted the camera away from me once by grabbing the
No.
webcam cord, and then he did it again. So he's used to it now. He likes when I demonstrate my creative process, but he figured out how to set up markers inside of After Effects before I could figure out how to.
Oh, deep breaths.
I don't
I've found many a hotkey when my pet is up at my computer with me, mostly because they bang around on my keyboard and then I have to fix whatever they did by accident.
right. Well, I didn't know how he did that, but then I figured it out later on, but I just sort of laughed about it. But I think he thought he was helping.
Uh-huh.
So there might be a chance that he shows up somewhere in the background, maybe.
I would love that. Ooh, this little baby. I'm trying to, I know that Elizabeth is asking for cat cam and chihuahua cam. I don't know. I don't know. But maybe if your cat, as you said, kind of creeps around, we'll get a cat cam.
Yeah.
I think
Now it's bouncing
my
around a
little
little
beast is
bit.
gone now.
Aw.
Don't let him fool you. He's a small, sweet baby. He's smaller than cat sized. He's very
Aw.
tiny. But he is a spoiled diva. He's definitely spoiled. So don't feel bad that he can't come in here. Elizabeth, he can't. He is throwing a fit, and I can't reward him when he throws fits, even if he's super adorable and looks like a tiny baby wolf.
Aw.
He's
But
a
I
long
need
hair chihuahua.
attention.
Yeah, he's a long hair chihuahua, so he's got lovely hair and fancy whiskers, and he thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread,
Aw.
which is true. He is, but I have to be firm as a dog mom. Let's see. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just I was just going to say I'm almost through adjusting. There were a couple of shifts in the footage that I wanted to address prior to moving on to the next part. Yeah, like right there, there's a shift over. So I'm going to keyframe that.
Awesome.
Okay, and then that looks like the starting point. So what I can do is, looks like there's some extra footage over there that I can play with. So let me look at the ending point here. All right, I'm going to drag this guide so it's there. And all right, and I'm going to take that one out.
The more you work on this, the smoother it's getting, and we're very close to achieving what I like to call buttery. It's
Yes.
just very buttery, and I like it. I like where it's going. Very nice. Is there anything that you think, this is a question I like to ask because it helps me a lot personally to hear people's experience with this, but I know that it can help a lot of our folks who are in chat, either here on Behance or on YouTube or watching these archived videos. Is there anything that comes to mind in your career? Because we've talked a lot about your favorites, but maybe your least favorite things in your career, either projects that were really difficult for you, or maybe mistakes that you have made, and how you solved those problems. And I know that's like it's a more difficult question, and so no need to elaborate if that one is not your favorite. But I find that kind of looking back and like at the lessons that we've learned and sharing those can be really helpful. For example, for me personally, I had a really hard time when I first started illustrating and streaming my process, especially too, like not spending enough time gathering reference images and stuff for my paintings and illustrations. I would keep a very small, narrow window open when it came to gathering what I needed to begin my project. And I was really, really self-conscious of other people giving me feedback, which is crazy because I was live streaming it, so kind of difficult. But I didn't gather enough reference. I didn't prepare well enough when I began my projects. And I took things to heart, like pretty strongly when I received feedback on it. And looking back now at those times, I think that one of the greatest lessons I ever learned, ever in my career, was the ability to take feedback. And to, even if it's feedback that is unsolicited or, not, it doesn't feel good, like being able to take that in. And that doesn't mean, to me, it doesn't mean like listening to what that feedback is telling me to do, but just receiving feedback a lot more gracefully and learning how to be confident in my own vision and my own desire for my work, even when some people don't like it. I think that's one of the biggest lessons I learned myself, and something that I like to bring up every so often because a lot of people struggle with it. But it was a lot easier once I got used to it and tried to remind myself that, when you put your work out there, I mean, you put your work out everywhere on the internet. It goes on YouTube, it goes on TV, it goes on all these places for large companies. Tons of people are going to see it. And everyone's going to have their own varying opinion. And I think for a long time, I thought that my goal, or what I was hoping, was that everyone who ever saw my art was going to love it. But it's simply not possible, So like just learning how to accept that information and the opinions of my work of others really made my life a lot easier. So something
Mhm.
like that, is there something that maybe you struggled with, that was difficult, and a lesson that you learned, and like how you solved that problem or got through that difficult time that you feel has been really valuable and served you well, going forward in your career?
I would say, and it's a fantastic question, by the way. I appreciate you asking that.
My pleasure.
Um, I've had several experiences working on projects with clients, personal projects of mine that I've had to go back and take another look at after maybe designing it and then revising it based on what I think would be stronger. In the case of working with clients, what I've found is depending on the client that I'm working with, usually I work with both people that are involved in the creative production process, but I also work with people that maybe have an understanding of what they want, but not
Mhm.
necessarily how to get there. And so, in some cases, there could be a disconnect where what they're describing isn't adding up to what you're presenting to them,
Mm,
because the terminology they're using to describe the scenario that they are hoping that you'll achieve uh, is different than what they mean.
mm,
And in some cases, there were projects where they wanted me to achieve a certain look, especially in visual effects, where they would go and they would describe something they wanted to see, but then we would go through several rounds of, no, it needs to be more like this,
mhm.
until it got to the point where ultimately I would ask them, could you send me a reference of what you're looking for? And then after that, it all seemed to
Ah,
click.
yeah, yeah.
So that's one. And then another one is I've worked with clients where maybe they don't understand the production process going from concept to storyboard to
Mm,
animatic and then to final animation. And what I was doing is I was presenting the animatic storyboards to this particular client, and their largest note going down was, there's no animation. And so I go ahead and I explain to them again that this is animatic until the visuals are greenlit,
mm.
only for them to follow up again and say, there's no animation. And in that case, I had to sort of jump a step and go straight to animation in order for them to see
Mhm.
ultimately what they were looking for. It
Yeah.
ended up being successful, but there was definitely a disconnect in communication there. So that's another thing that I always look out for is what they mean when they say a specific when they state a specific note.
Mm,
What are they actually referring to, and do I need to follow up and ask more questions? So it's not so much any projects that I don't like, it's projects where there was definitely a learning curve, and I know that going into the next one, depending
mhm.
on who I work with.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with a lot of that. I think some of the more difficult interactions that I've had when it comes to like working with a difficult client or just like really trying to get a project right. And it, you know, most of the time that I'm having those issues, it's because of what you said, where, you know, you work with people who are creative, who've had a hand in some way in some kind of creative project. Maybe they work a creative job, aside from just being like heavily involved with the more creative sides of a business. But then you also, you know, we're going to work with a lot of people who are not really creatively inclined. That's what they're hiring us for. That, you know, I'm going to work with a lot of people who don't illustrate, which is why they would ask me to paint or illustrate for them. And you're going to work with a lot of people who need video, visual content, and all of these awesome things that you've got in your portfolio for them, but they don't do that. You know, they need
Right.
your services. And so that means that there's probably a lot of opportunity open for them to really not understand the process, exactly what it takes to get to that end product. And I've run into sometimes, specifically one I can remember very, very well, where the person that I was working with really could not like visualize mentally what the end product of something would look like based
Hmm.
on sketches and process stills that I sent along the way.
Wow.
I think that they were looking for something a lot more substantial. So when I sent them sketches and like still shots of my progress as I went along, I was getting a lot of messages back like, this isn't what we want. We want it to look like the images that we sent to you, like that level of detail. And I, you know, said, well, it will, but I just kind of showing you how I'm going. And if you know, I'm showing you the sketches and how we get to there and all that kind of stuff. But there was a big disconnect. And it was, I think, because that person was not informed. I don't want to say informed, you know, but just really not familiar with the creative process and what a sketch would be, and the understanding that that sketch will develop into what they asked for. And I have proof in my portfolio that it will develop into that. But the communication getting around that when that had happened was, it was difficult. And I realized that you really have to put a lot of time into how you communicate with people who are completely unfamiliar with your creative field, you know. um,
Absolutely.
it's very important. And I think that was an example for me that was quite dramatic compared to some of the issues that a lot of people may face, you know, along the same lines. But it was eye-opening for sure. um, so yeah, I definitely feel you on those points that you mentioned. Um, and then just to kind of check in back into the process here, I'm seeing some changes. I'm seeing some new features and things. So what are we doing now? What are we working on?
So right now I'm actually playing with the overall timing. So taking into account that they're going to start the song at a specific point, I kept the timing there in real time, but I'm also playing with the timing prior so that what you see is the most visually strong part of the footage going into the song ahead.
Mm, nice, nice.
So that's all set up, ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and pre-compose this. I like to pre-compose my layers as I go so that certain adjustments are kept intact and that it's a non-destructive process. So in case you have to go back and make adjustments later on to a specific um, part of the process, you can do that without affecting any other part
Mm,
because of where it is.
nice.
So I'm going to call this time. I'm going to move it into the new composition. I unchecked the adjust to the time span of the selected layer because I wanted to maintain the timing of the overall composition from start to finish. So if you check that, it's going to adjust to the start and stop points of that clip rather than the overall composition.
Gotcha. Yes, working very smart here. I like it.
Thank you.
I like it very much.
And so now what I'm going to do is actually start playing with the framing aspect of the footage here.
All
So I'm
right.
going to introduce some solids here. I'm going to change that to, okay. And what I'm also going to do I'm going to set up the title action safe, which is also known as the safe margins in Premiere. And these are typically used for broadcast standards so that specific information based on what resolution you're dealing with stays within a particular frame.
Mm-hmm.
It's more for older formats, but I like to use it as an overall guide.
Okay.
So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the guides that are on screen now that I am in the next part of the process. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, that's one of the fixed cameras right there.
Nice.
So, and it looks like it alternates here. But I could also extend it as well, which might be really nice. The question is, do I want to, I know one of them should stay, I know how it should be set up. Okay, I think I have an idea.
I just heard a spark of inspiration audibly in you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so now what I'm doing is I'm actually going to change the solid settings. You can set up masks, but for this kind of process, I find that it's easier to just work with the overall shape.
Mhm.
And I'm going to elaborate on that in just a moment. So I'm actually going to have them touching, just barely touching the edges of the outside margin here.
Mhm.
You know what? I'm going to, there's a couple of tricks I like to do in order for it to be the most visually streamlined. So either I will solo out just that particular solid to work with it, or I will put a fill adjustment on it so that there's a color pop over that particular layer.
Nice.
So I can easily see it against the footage that it is going to be used for track matting.
Awesome. And I feel like I've seen some of these videos where like the tracking on something is like very, very dramatic. And like a lot of people are posting like YouTube shorts and stuff of like dance videos where the tracking is on their head and it moves it around like really, really cool. And so being able to see this behind the scenes of you putting this together and kind of understanding the details and the process to get there, to see a lot of the videos that I've just been like consuming specifically recently is really, really cool. And this is one of the parts that I was really interested to kind of see for this process of like, after you've tracked it and everything, how does that come together visually as something that looks, you know, kind of contained. So this is fun.
Thank you.
Richard says, in the Northern Hemisphere, nights are now longer than days. How much screen time is spent an hour to stabilize? Do you mean like how much time do you does she take to finish these during the day? Is that what you mean, Richard? Or let us know in the chat.
It's a good question.
Yeah. I'd also love, you know, to kind of tack on to the end of that. Are you an early bird or a night owl when it comes to working?
I tend to be a night owl when it comes to the creative process. I tend to be the kind of person where I won't realize how much time has gone by while I'm working on a project. I mean, this is just, I love the work I do, and
Yep. Enough said, you know.
yeah.
I love the work I do. I think I've been a night owl most of my life, I think has been like a serious thing, but for whatever reason, I don't know. I just had a birthday, so maybe it's because this is the year I turned 30. All of a sudden, I'm just like, let's get up at 5 a.m. Like I'm up early to start my workday now, and it's bizarre. So I'm a retired night owl. And
Nice.
now I am an early bird when it comes to work. I'd love to know about you folks in the chat if you work early or in the evening. Also, Rosa says, wow, welcome in, Rosa. It's good to see you.
So right now I have it set to full resolution in the preview. To streamline the process, I'm going to set it to quarter resolution. I tend to do that a lot, where I will alter it so I can see what the final result is going to look like. But then if I need to make additional changes, I can also change it so it's rendering every fourth pixel or every eighth pixel. And hello, Jeremy. We were talking about you earlier.
Is Jeremy here? Oh no.
He's here.
Cat cam, I can see a little bit. I don't think our audience can see him just yet because I can see the larger uncropped version of your webcam, but eventually you folks may get to glimpse the fabled Jeremy.
Oh, he loves to keep me company while I'm working. What are you
I'm so
doing?
excited. You talk to him like I talk to my dog. I have very intense and important conversations with my dog, and the things that we discuss as I'm working are along the lines of, how did he get so handsome? How did he become so small? Why are his papas so tiny? You know, all of those important things. And it's mostly in that exact voice you just used.
Nice.
Elizabeth said, "Is the baby talk voice applies to all babies, even fur babies?" 100%.
Yes.
100%. I don't know anyone who talks seriously at their dog. You gotta have a baby voice with them at some point.
Now I'm looking at this, and I think I need to make the left-hand frame a little bit larger to account for not just Andrew moving across to the other side of the stage where Ben is, but also including more of the environment for that particular clip. So I'm going to move these down here. And a lot of this is based on trial and error, deciding what looks the strongest. And so I'll adjust it until it looks right.
Sometimes you do have to eyeball it, you know, you gotta go with the vibe. And I think that many a time I have, because sometimes when I work, I will set myself up templates and things. Like if I'm working on a project and I think, wow, I just did that pretty quick. Is there a way that I can save a version of this that will allow me to work a similar project later with this swiftness? I will save myself little outlines or take a note, even as simple as taking a note or something. But I often find every once in a while, you can't really predict exactly how projects like this will go, especially when you're working with like so much footage. And so you are incredibly organized and very precise here in your process, but I love that you are also like, you know what, sometimes you just have to nudge it until it feels like it's going to work. You can't really dictate all the time exactly how it will go. And so that's pretty cool. There's a little bit of organic flow, you know, to projects like this.
And I agree with you completely on that. One of the main aspects of motion design that I always keep in mind is that the main focus with any project is problem solving, creative problem solving. So you will be you'll end up having to deal with circumstances that maybe weren't apparent at the time. Like, for example, if I'm working with handheld shake in a particular part of the footage that was captured, maybe because I was working around photographers or people in the audience that were right behind me. There's many factors that play into what could cause an issue, and knowing how to work around it and produce something that's stronger than maybe what you expected is always good. And it allows you to know what to do the next time it happens if you're faced with that again. And that's the important thing.
Yeah,
I've experienced.
100%. And I like what you say about, you know, a lot of this stuff is problem solving. I can't tell you how dumbfounded I was the moment I realized I hated math all through school. So I became an artist, and now I solve more problems than I ever have in my life. And it really is creative problem solving. finding a solution to things and saving a formula so that you can approach it again at a later date and know what
Absolutely.
you're doing. It really is. Garrett says he talks seriously to his cats, by the way. I'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it. I've never spoken seriously for more than a few moments to my animals. Like I always devolve into baby talk. That's just how it goes for
Aw.
me. Sam Peterson says he often discusses with his cat how big his paws are. I feel like it's a question a lot of us probably ask our pet. How did you get so small? How'd you get so cute? How'd your ears get so soft? That's just the questions you need to know.
Yeah.
Photographers should know how to turn on silent shooting at venues. Gareth, yeah. Do you get? I don't go
Click,
to a
click,
lot
click,
of.
click.
Yeah, like I don't go to a lot of events like this. It's a lot of I feel like I'm a extroverted introvert because I can be like, you know, having a good time and pounding around on stream, but like when I'm in public at a venue like this, I would be standing on the sidelines like holding a bottle of water and like terrified to move into the crowd. But I imagine that yes, there would probably be tons of cameras around with the flash and all of those sounds on, although I wasn't thinking of that because I'm not really familiar. What in your experience are there just like hundreds of people with loud cameras, or is that only like press and stuff typically that have cameras like that?
Um, at some of the bigger venues now, in my experience, photographers working with the event and the possibility of there being clicks from the camera. It's not necessarily something that I tend to focus on because usually when they're taking photos, I'm also having to film, but the music that's being performed is also loud enough to drown out that aspect that
Mm,
could get in the way. But if it was a more quiet venue, I could see that being an issue. But usually, in those circumstances, I'm working alongside people that maybe are trained photographers and they know when to adjust their settings in order for me to get the best possible footage. So there's a mutual respect between
mm.
professionals at these events.
Oh, that's nice. Awesome. To the point of like being comfortable in the crowd, like are you super comfortable like waiting out, because I obviously this is like a passion for you to be able to, you know, put a project like this together, but is it no problem for you to like get out there and wade into all those people, or is it like a little stressful?
That is a good question. I found that the majority of the venues that I film at, whether they're music festivals or they're local performances, I find that the audience is really respectful
Mm,
whenever I'm working the majority of the time. The only issue that I would get into sometimes is if maybe the room was smaller than expected, so the crowd is closer to you.
mm,
But even still, there was one time I was filming the black ties on location and I think somebody bumped into me. Now I was wearing my harness,
mhm.
so I was able to just keep focusing. Usually I just roll with it when it comes to these kinds of events, but they actually like I could hear them apologize to me like from behind and I thought it
Oh
was
no.
sweet.
That is very sweet. And
Yeah.
I imagine too it's, you know, probably has a lot to do with the kind of music and the fans that this sort of thing would attract as well. And I don't know how many different kinds of maybe genres and things that you've covered, but I imagine this is probably a lot different than it would be if it was like a heavy metal concert and you're moving around in the crowd trying to get the footage. That would be a no for me. I'd be like, you know what, I'll stay home and catch it on YouTube later. I don't think I will do that. That's a little much for me.
Well, I would think that the process, while the genre is a bit different, what you are ultimately capturing is the energy and the motion
Mm,
of those musicians on stage. So that would be where my focus would go. And when I was filming other musicians at this event, some of them moved quite a bit and there would be a lot of hair movement. They would jump around on stage. and I would be sure to capture as much as I could. And
Mm,
that was always exciting for me because you could tell they were having fun with it. And I was able to capture that.
that's
So
awesome.
you see their joy through the footage. And that's always the most thrilling thing for me to find when I'm going through all of the video that's been captured on location.
That's awesome. I love, and I don't, like I said, I don't, film large things, large events and stuff like this and do the editing for this sort of thing. A lot of the video editing that I do is like personal promotion or process videos or like training videos and things. But I just kind of listening to you talk about this, I can really imagine a lot of the joy just being able to not only be there and like experience those moments you're talking about where the musicians are having an excellent time and doing all those things, but then like I assume this went on for hours, and then you come home and you get to like kind of go through all of it and find those gems again in the footage is
Absolutely.
got to be a great time for sure. um
Absolutely.
Also, just a heads up, we are going to be coming to a close in about 20 minutes. So just a heads up for you, Natalie, as well as all of you folks who are hanging out with us in the chat. If you have any questions or anything that you would love to ask us, please let them get them into the chat so that we can go over some things. We've got a chunk of time left, but definitely let us know if you have any questions. And then maybe we can kind of check back in here, Natalie, with the process. Everything is really starting to come together. I feel like I'm looking right now at like something that, when we first started kind of doing all the tracking, but I feel like I'm looking at something closer to like a produced piece now, and I'm starting to get really excited. So what is, after you come to this point, what do you do next?
Well, typically, what I like to do is I'll review what the setup is. I also take into account the color differences between cameras. So I'm going to be doing additional color correction to give it all a consistent feel in terms of highlight and shadow tones. So they're unified with the handheld footage, which has sort of a blue undertone. So I'm going to be playing with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also going to be playing with the track mats themselves, which I went ahead to set up. The solids that I brought in, I scaled and adjusted the position so I could use them to mask only certain parts of the footage that I'm working with, to give it a multi-panel look
Mm-hmm.
so that there are several moments happening in unison
Yeah.
and you can see them on all of the screens. But I'm also going to play with the overall reveals, which I'm also going to take into account the beat of the song, which I have set up inside of the Premiere project, markered
Oh,
out.
nice. Yeah.
So I can actually follow that time code and match it up in After Effects, and it'll update because of the dynamic link inside of Premiere. And so if I need to adjust maybe the timing of one of the reveals, I can go and make that adjustment. So then it's directly on the beat of the song inside of Premiere, but the visuals are as detailed as they can be. And that's what I like about working between both programs, using the best aspects of both programs in order to streamline the overall production process.
I love it. I love it. It's you kind of going over those details. I can immediately tell that like the end result of this is going to be so much more personal, like more of an intimate kind of experience of somebody who like can't be there but is watching this. The elements are kind of moving with the music, and it's not just playing the music and showing you the video. And then the way that you're setting this up, where you get like this surround view of what was going on during these moments, I can feel as I'm looking at you edit this, just with these three different views of this moment happening. I feel like instead of just seeing the close up of him and watching him sing, with the other elements, I feel like I know what it was like to stand in that crowd. And that is awesome.
Whenever I put together a promo, I always like to capture the smaller details when musicians are performing. in addition to the environment itself. So you really get a sense of how much goes into a
Mm.
production like this and how much goes into their performance. And you really get a feel for just
Like,
that
yeah,
musicians.
yeah, like all the little things that, you know, because it's not just bunch of guys playing a song, you know, it's a performance, it's a show, you know, and there's so much more that goes into that beyond what you might glimpsed, you know, through a narrower view of one tiny place. Like I feel like you do what you said, is like you capture all the nuances and all of the details, and I imagine you're very, very good at it because you, like you said, you love what you do, so you have an eye to pick out those things and really give that to the people who will watch this later, and I think it definitely shows, Natalie,
Thank you.
100%. It really does.
So right
um
now, I'm just framing the handheld so that the most important aspects of that composition are represented inside of the track mat, alongside uh, the fixed cameras that were set up along the stage.
mhm. um Wishart is asking if you synchronize the mobile cam and the fixed cam clocks, so they're all, that's actually that's an excellent question, Richard, and I was kind of wondering this too, because I myself, I've done, like I said, I've done video editing, but never with multiple views and all that kind of stuff, so I'm wondering how, um in also in a setting where you have more than this, is it really seamless, like once you get all the footage and like start placing it so that it's all together? Have you ever had something go wrong where they weren't all like together and you have to like eyeball that and like try to sync stuff up? Has that ever happened?
Where do I begin?
Oh, tell us the story, Natalie.
Well, there have been circumstances, and it's a bit of a learning curve. First of all, working with multicam, and I sort of had to learn this over time, where in order to have multiple cameras set up, first of all, making sure that they are so making sure that they're tethered and that the battery stays on for the amount of time that you need them, especially if it's a longer performance like this. Luckily, this performance, I was able to capture the entire thing. But there have been circumstances where maybe because the battery disconnects, or no, the tether disconnects, or maybe the battery runs out, one of the cameras shuts off.
Oh
So,
no.
and it's happened. It's happened. Now, luckily, I usually have multiple audio sources to work with. So if I lose one, what I'll end up doing is I'll try to problem solve around that aspect and try to come up with something that's inventive visually in order to uh, again make it the strongest that it can be. And there are ways to go about doing that. You know, for
Mhm.
example, early on when I was working with maybe one camera and one handheld camera and one fixed camera, um, the issue comes where maybe I'm moving around to different musicians and maybe the direction of the audio is also changing. And that was something I had to learn about early on in order to problem solve around that when I was just expanding my equipment setup. And then later on, I got more cameras that would allow me to really finesse the audio and the visuals, among other things. But it has
Mhm.
happened, and you just sort of roll with it and try to come up with something that presents your subject matter in the best light possible, especially in this case.
Nice, nice. And I can kind of visualize what you mean. Like, you know, if one of your cameras stops rolling, or I've had a situation in which, for whatever reason, the footage that I had, there's a chunk of it in the center of it that I had no video. I had just the
Oh
audio.
no.
I was like, what happened? And so I was really bummed out. But what I ended up having to do, luckily I had other stuff recorded. So I just kind of like played it. And then during that portion I was explaining something, I chose to do some graphics and like a little animation that I made that kind of showed what I was explaining rather than like me explaining it, and it worked, you know. So it's like kind of that finesse of like, okay, it's not that there was no video there and just audio, it's just that the way that this video was intended to be made was to cut to some helpful informative graphics at that time. And you know, so I feel like I finessed it and it worked, but I know that feeling where you know, you get to your footage or whatever and you're like, what happened? Where did it go? Oh no. But it's also, you know, it's fun to laugh about now, but it is frustrating and
Yes.
stressful when it happens. Like I've run into some stressful moments with that, and I'm just like, definitely more fun to laugh about it now.
Absolutely.
When it happened, I was like, don't talk to me. Don't speak. I need to figure this out.
But then you also know what to do the next time it happens.
Yes.
When that occurred, I figured out what the issue was and revised my setup so that I could avoid it the next time. And ultimately, that experience did help later on.
Yeah, 100%. It kind of harkens back to what we discussed earlier of like solving problems and taking note of those so that as you go forward in your career, you have the tools necessary to move forward without so many hiccups. And I think, honestly, even if you don't develop like a solid formula for how to solve that problem when it happens, going through it and experiencing it and having the like the experience of realizing that your footage or your audio is not as you originally thought it was being recorded helps, just because that first initial shock of it happening the first time with you is, you know, it's over and done with, and you have a little more preparedness. Definitely would suggest that you know, once you solve the issue, you know, kind of take that into account. So like I said, sometimes I make like a template or something. If something goes wrong and I fix something, I will save that file with notes in it so that and
Nice.
title it what problem I had and like put it in the archive of all of my work so I know what it is. But yeah, even the experience of like going through those issues, I like to remember that doing something great the first time is excellent, but getting something wrong or having something go wrong for you is not a failure, because I feel like
Yes.
knowing what doesn't work and knowing what you shouldn't do is almost like just as valuable as getting it right, because then, you know, you might not have like the boom, this is what you do for this, but knowing what you're not supposed to do still keeps you from veering down unsuccessful paths when you come to those problems or situations similar in the future. So
Absolutely.
Richard saying separate audio is easier to manipulate without it being noticeable as it would be apparent with visual. Yeah. Elizabeth says it's not failure, it's a learning experience. Amen. Yes,
Yes.
positive about, you know, that, gosh, because I used to beat myself up about failures in quotes. You know, I just, something like that would happen and I'll be like, it's my fault. And you know what? Sometimes it was my fault, but not, you know, so much so that I should have beat myself up about it as much as I did. Learning experiences are incredibly valuable, and you got to remind yourself of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sam is posting some lovely links for Natalie in the chat. If you folks want to check out Natalie's website, definitely do so. We've got the Behance link in the chat and the Instagram in the chat. Take a look at her work. And is there any place like in particular that you feel like you're maybe the most active, just in case somebody would like to contact you in the future, either for advice, to ask a question, or for work in the future? Where is the best place to do that for you?
Well, the best place to do that, I actually have my contact information inside of my demo reel. So there's actually an email. If there are clients that want to discuss work, they can contact me by phone if they desire. They can also see my work on Behance, my professional website. Sometimes I will share my work on social media as long as it's greenlit to share.
Mm.
But I'm pretty active on pretty much every social media platform. If you want to see the work that I do with the black ties, you can go to their Facebook page, which I usually link uh, in my projects. But if you go to Black Ties NJ on Facebook, you will probably find them. You can see some of the work. You can see most of the work that I do with them as social media producer, in addition to all the other work that I've done with visual effects and motion design clients.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. And just a quick reminder, we have about 5 minutes. I can't believe that the time has already passed, basically. That's kind of crazy to me. I can't believe we've been sitting here for almost 2 hours. That's wild. Time flies when you're having fun with your friends.
Absolutely.
And this has been a blast. But is there any last bit of parting advice or tips and tricks that you would like to leave us with in these last 5 minutes of the stream? And also, after that, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what we're going to be working on tomorrow, because we will be back tomorrow at noon, 12 p.m. Pacific, with Natalie again for another day of design. So yeah, any last tips and tricks and a recap, and maybe plans for tomorrow?
Sure. So in my own experience, I've found that doing research on any given project so you fully understand it absolutely makes a difference. If you fully understand the subject matter and are able to represent it fully when working with it, it shows that you care about the client and what they're hoping you're going to present thoughtfully. In addition to that, there are different kinds of motion designers. Perhaps some are generalists versus ones that are specialists. Now, I consider myself a strong generalist, but there are some out there that maybe understand one aspect of the production process, but maybe they understand it on a level that's more detailed than, say, a generalist would.
Hmm.
And it's important to take into account the approach of that designer, their stylistic approach. In addition, I've always found that having a strong foundation, whenever anybody asks me about how to get started in motion design, it's important to understand how the design principles and the animation principles intertwine together to give you an overall strong result. And you have to have that basis. It's good to know the programs. I work in the Adobe Creative Suite in between programs on a constant basis, daily. But really, at the core, it's understanding what makes strong design and what makes strong animation. And if you're going beyond that and including film media, what makes strong film compositions and presentation of that film. And then going beyond that, what adjustments, what effects adjustments are going to enhance your visuals overall. The best piece of advice that I was ever given as a student at Ringling was just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Yes.
And
yes.
what that means is you have to take into account what it's for, who it's for, the overall presentation, and you want to make sure that the stylistic approach enhances the subject matter and that it also matches what you're working on, but that your adjustments don't obscure your visuals. And that is something I always take into account when working with any project, including stuff like this.
Yeah, this is excellent advice, by the way. I said, any lasting, tips and tricks, and I always get different things at the end of a stream like this. Sometimes people will say, nope, that's it for today. Tune in tomorrow. Some people add a couple of things, but I feel like those were two seriously solid nuggets of information. I just took mental notes and I'm going to write them down.
Oh,
I love it.
Writing down notes is also a good thing to do when talking with clients so that you can refer back to what they said as a checklist. So I completely...
Oh my gosh. Every time I've ever not taken notes while talking to a client, I have regretted it almost instantly. Note taking is seriously a big deal. Rather you are taking audio notes or writing it down on a piece of paper, or sometimes I just open Fresco if I have my iPad next to me, and I'll just write it, like I'm
Yeah.
using a pen and paper. Note taking, very important. I 100% agree. And then in our last few moments, because we have like maybe 2 minutes here. What do we have planned tomorrow? So we've gone over kind of tracking this image and making it a lot more stable and all that stuff, and then kind of putting it together in here to create this really great visualization of the experience of this performance. But what are we going to be kind of jumping into today? What can people, or tomorrow, excuse me, not today. We're done, folks. It's been 2 hours. But what are we jumping into tomorrow specifically you might want to highlight to folks, and all that good stuff?
Well, in addition to working with possibly other compositions and playing with a multi-panel approach, I'm also going to be finalizing the footage, color correcting it so it all has a consistent look and feel. And I'm also going to be playing with how the track mats reveal, which is going to involve timing that with the beat of the song so that there's a nice synchronization happening between the dynamic link in Premiere and After Effects. So elaborate visuals in After Effects, but that they're also synced in Premiere with the audio that's been set up in the overall timeline.
I am so excited. So we are coming to a close now, folks. Thank you all for joining us. Natalie, I have to say, you are just an absolute joy. It is so great to just listen to you talk. I feel like I've learned so much today. We've got Natalie's links and things in the chat if you folks would like to follow her. And I'm looking forward to hanging out and spending more time tomorrow, Natalie. This was great.
Looking forward to it.
All righty. Thanks everyone again, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon. Adios, everybody.